I have seen the wonders, lost as I was, lost to fear, lost to the dark of war. But I saw the wonders still. As I travel, they travel with me, one step behind, ever present, ever watching. And they live with me, rage with me, and fight with me as old friends. They fight with me just as they fight with the soldier next to me, and we step forward together, those wonders ever in our wake.
There is a tradition in the first dug trench on a new world. Here's how it works. You and all the soldiers in your unit put aside a single bullet. Now, that bullet can be from anything. We always used autogun rounds. Each of us would place a round on a small platform, sheltered from the weather, and we would leave them all there. If I were to guess, I would say that there are roughly 20,000 or so rounds on the various worlds we visited. The rounds remain as a testament to the potential of the soldiers who leave them. That's just one of the many traditions and superstitions you pick up in the Guard. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the start, before all of this came to pass. Not 50 feet from the Habstack in which I was born, there was a hill. More of a low-rise, really. And on that low-rise was one of the last trees that stood on Cadia. Most refused to believe that I lived near a tree. They were so rare on my homeworld, but it's true. I have the records of a pinned broken arm to prove that I did, in fact, fall from that tree. We would play there sometimes, myself and a dozen or so other children, when we weren't stripping weapons or sewing gear, or being yelled at in the Schola Minoris. Oh, the propaganda is true. Most of us can indeed strip a lasgun before we can walk. It's an expected baseline practice of all Cadians. We all serve, you see. All of us. Duty never ends. We are born to serve, and serve we certainly do. Training, training, training. That's the way. The Scholams are crammed full of students, far too many to teach. And directors are far too few to teach so many. All of the young will go on to join the Guard after leaving the Scholam. Oh, some of them will be picked for this role or that, and a few go on to further education, but no matter what, we all go to boot. We learn to be soldiers, machines. We learn to love our weapon and to treat it well. We learn that it will treat us well in kind. You're always learning. In the classroom, in your hab block, in the streets. Cadia is a hard world, and it is a harder world on which to grow up. You'll lose teeth and break arms, hands and knuckles. Every house has a flank port in the sub-level, so that a soldier can fire at their enemies. And you learn fast how to slide in those ports to hide. But not every house has enough to eat. And you learn this too. Whoever can take what they need survives. And there's never enough. Ever. But if you're lucky, like me, you might be chosen to be further eliminated by the God Emperor's will. I was 13 standard when I was chosen for the Officers Cadet programme. No small honour. apparently. I was good at remembering names and faces and numbers of soldiers from the battles we studied as young ones. And that remembering saw me studying for 2 years, studying 12 hours a day, and training for 4 more. Trust me here when I say you've not known tired until you've written a treaty on the Siege of Vrax, and then ran 15 miles in full gear, gas mask non-optional. Hard days. Oh, I resented them. But then we all did. We were supposed to. They didn't need weak, breakable officers. No, they needed officers who would spit their last ounce of blood into the face of the being who pissed them off. And we certainly spat blood. It's not all glamour, honour, and warmth. Quite the opposite. Standard Guard training and recruitment is vicious. The officers' programmes are made to test the most vicious even further. I was a feral weedy thing. Eyes on fire with resentment and fury. And they saw that in me and tempered it. Emperor knows they had more patience with me than I ever had with myself. By the time I left, I was 15 years old and 6 feet tall, and could strip a lasgun, an autocannon, an autogun or a las pistol, and I'd also learned the basic tenets of the officer's skill. From there, we were attached to someone in some form of command. Prain von Kazagors greeted me with a sneer and a look of obvious disgust. He was an officer first class, almost a commissar, but he turned that down so that he could stay with the soldiers he knew. Good man was Prain. Brutal and efficient, but good. He had a replacement eye, and had demanded that the tech priests and engineers recolour it to be purple. He had that most rare of gifts from Cadia. Purple eyes. He would tell me, over our scant meals, how I would never be respected because I was a woman. He wanted to see if I would snap and attack him. I knew he was baiting me on, so I ignored him. I studied under him for 5 days a week and spent the other 2 in classes with a handful of other cadets. We were lectured to and told this or that. We studied this weapon or that weapon, but sometimes we would have special visiting officers, generals, and commissars. There was a lecture once given by a commissar general from Cadia. He was the leader of the Cadia 1944s, a 15,000-strong band of veteran irregulars who had burned their way across dozens of worlds against dozens of Xenos breeds. He was terribly scarred. He'd been slashed by a hormigaunt. The livid purple scars stretched as he spoke. It was bold to let a Cadachanian general talk to such young cadets. He had a theory that he used to test his own assistants. Bolts or boots, he called it. He told my scholar class that the only truly good commissar, officer, or general is one who asks if a soldier has enough rounds for his gun. An officer who checks the boots, the collars, and the shine of medals is only concerned about vanity and is not a good leader. You can imagine how much the starched collars bristled at that. Hilarious. If you don't check that your soldiers have enough rounds, enough water and food, how can you know how they are? If you don't know how they are, how can you ensure that they will perform well in battle? That stuck with us, young as we were. Gors told me that he was correct. He'd known of starched collar commissars who treated their men terribly and had been stabbed to death in their sleep. The bonds formed between soldiers are bonds born from the tenacity of life in moments wherein it is least certain. You don't shoot a soldier's comrade who he has fought besides. who he has almost died with and been saved by, you don't do that and have the act be forgotten. Don't be shocked when your own men turn their blades on you. You'll deserve it, too. That was Commissar General Jet Manarius for you. No lies or sugar-coated words. I spent another year doing much the same. And then, at the ripe old age of 16, I was shipped off-world to die somewhere else. Or to live with tenacity. I left with Prain and his soldiers. 5,000 Cadians. 5,000 of us. We travelled round the Eye, assisting where we were needed. On Gallan Secundus, I watched with ash-filled eyes as 500 basilisks levelled a city that had been captured by worshippers of the dark gods. Nothing makes you pray harder than basilisks. Trust me there. And I realised, after Gallan, that the young girl I had been was gone. She was burned out of me in foxholes and trenches. Killed out of me when I pulled the trigger on an autogun that was pointed at a being who wanted to kill me. And the whole time, Prain was watching. He saw me kill 4 ragged, wretched cultists and drag a soldier back into cover. That soldier, and the many like him that I have known, have taught me so much. I've learned how you and the 8 or 9 closest soldiers to you should cook your meals in one pot so as to share some actual flavour. I've learned that the battle doesn't matter when you're up to your knees in it. Every moment matters. For war is a series of 1 billion micro-battles fought from moment to moment. You're fighting. That woman who is tightening the straps on her thigh holster, she's fighting too. We're all fighting. All the time. Against the cold or the heat. Against chaos or rebellion. The foe doesn't matter. Your drive matters. That's the guard. In my opinion. A faceless, seething legion of men and women fighting moment to moment, against all odds, just to live. I left a finger on Gallan Secundus, and learned to always shoot an enemy you presume is dead. Otherwise, they might be lying on a knife, feigning death. Fun and games, now. Our small unit was reduced to 3,718 after Gallan. There were awards and retirements and funerals, and though I don't remember them all, I remember enough. And we 3,718 soldiers left Gallan Secundus and were shipped off to Vectus, a small agri-world. Hard lesson on Vectus. Hard lessons indeed. One man's war is another man's slaughter. That's what I learned there. Vectus was a world that grew largely wheat crop derivatives and sent 80% of their harvests off-world to feed us, poor, starving soldiers. Simply put, it was too much. There was no reason that they should starve when they grow the food. And they wanted everyone to know that they had had enough. Don't carry them with you, Elise. Don't do it. Prain told me that before we made planetfall. And I wasn't sure what he meant. I, of course, learned quickly what he meant. The populace of a small city was in peaceful, open revolt, demanding better hours, less dangerous machinery, better scolums, and more food. I understand that. They didn't understand the scope, though. To change one thing on one world means changing them on all worlds. And even the Mechanicus would have trouble going about such a dreadful feat of administration. Prain, his soldiers, and I were tasked with monitoring the crowd and keeping people safe. Make sure no problem starters started any problems. Stop it from getting bloody before it even begins, Elise. Good advice, really. I have to be fair. After roughly 4 hours, a stage was built, and a few Union leaders railed against the barbarism of starving to death when you lived in a breadbasket. I was in front of the stage with 50 other soldiers. Prayne was just behind me, and then I learned what he meant when he said, "Don't carry them with you, because 2 people each threw a rock." On the last day of my 17th year, I was hit in the eye with a jagged outcrop of rockcrete. That's a nice gift. One hit me and fractured my eye socket, and the other hit Prayne in the mouth. I could see that things got bad quickly. That would be an understatement, because that peaceful protest became a bloodbath. Being in the guard isn't all deck-packing bunkers full of the servants of the dark gods. Sometimes it means shooting people by the thousands who dared to throw a rock. Does that make me a monster? That I did that? Ordered that? Saw that? Am I more monstrous for not remembering their faces? The faces of the union leaders and the farmers? Was it an overreaction? It would be easy for you to think that yes, it was. But it wasn't. Because if one person can throw a rock, soon another will wish to do so. And then after 100 years, the arbitrators are being butchered in the street. I know I can't predict the future or say that that would happen, except for the fact that it has. It has happened before. The rule of law must be strict and we must enforce it, whether we like it or not. Prayne couldn't speak for a month. You can imagine the jokes that were made about an officer who had had his jaw wired shut. That was when I learned what we officers call the officer voice. One of the soldiers under Prayne's command had taken to drawing little pictures of his officer with various silly pieces of headgear on, and it was up to me to shut him the hell up. Private First Class Lurshane was ever the joker, and singly capable of avoiding trouble of any kind. I found him drawing in a burned-out silo, and told him, in no uncertain words, that he would stop mocking Officer Gores, or I would show him what pain really was. Do you know what he did? That ever-smirking, wiry little stoat. He laughed in my face. Bastard. I was dumbfounded. Utterly dumbfounded. Then I told him that I would take his notebooks and burn them all if he didn't stop. And then he didn't bloody laugh. He went to say something, but thought better of it. I still had a patch over one eye after that rock had fractured the socket. I think that added to the finality of my statement. His life didn't matter, but his books certainly did. How pathetic that moment was. After we left Vectus, he did apologise to Prayne, and then me. He didn't mean to laugh. He was just shaken by what he had seen. He, like myself, had never put down a rebellion, let alone one led by unarmed farmers. He wasn't really guard material either, so why wouldn't he be horrified? We then went to support a group of Space Marines near the Cadian Gate proper. That was the first time I ever saw a Space Marine. It was the first time any of us had ever seen them. I mean, we'd seen images and picked feats and read about them. But in person, nothing like it, my friend. The Salamanders are without a doubt the most tenacious, vicious, and friendly creatures our galaxy has ever bred. I learned a lot under their tutelage, and consider myself lucky to have lived after meeting them. Many do not meet the Emperor's angels and survive to tell the tale. A band of pirates, some 250,000 strong, had appeared from warp space and were terrorising trade fleets. They were looters and butchers and needed to be put down. A young neophyte salamander told me much of the history of the Salamanders. On his breastplate, he had carved the words, "Vulcan lives." And I would hear those words long after we had dealt with the pirates. It was during these hellish 3 years that I learned all about the abject horror that is ship-to-ship warfare. Anyone who says that boarding actions are easy is an arrogant, empty-headed fool, and you should ignore them. Being crammed into a tiny ship with 49 other soldiers, all of you sweating and shaking and hoping not to die in the void of space, that is not fun. I was lucky because I got to board alongside the Salamanders. I was an officer in training, remember? To say I was less than useless is an understatement, I won't lie. What assistance can a 19-year-old baseline human, with a las pistol, possibly offer an 8-foot-tall god of war? Nothing. That's what. Beyond cheers and words of encouragement. You wouldn't think a space marine could possibly be as fast as they are, but they are streaks of lightning, flying from target to target. Oh, there's a wall in the way. Not anymore. Here's a plasma cannon. Oh, there's a corridor filled to bursting with knife-wielding mutants. Here's an autocannon. I felt like I was building sandcastles next to Rogel Dorn. But there's always something to learn. And in those 3 years, across mutated, semi-sentient hell ships, in the corridors of blood, I learned how to keep soldiers from breaking in close quarters. The average guardsman won't really remember there's a salamander next to him when he can't reload his gun because his hands are shaking. When all is noise and fury, a good officer is a port of calmness. You have to be able to blank out the hate and walk, or run, from soldier to soldier and remind them that they are not lost. That's what the neophyte taught me. Keep them calm. That's all that matters. A soldier is only as brave as his heart is strong. You have to keep their hearts brave and true, especially when they're facing the horror. Little did I know how true those words were in the end. You see, time burns in combat. You can lose days and weeks in the heat of battle. I certainly did. 15,000 dead Cadians, 15 dead Salamanders, 4 lost ships, and a sea of dead pirates and rebels. A successful mission. And just like that, I had earned my first medal, the Flaming Claw, given to all of us by the Salamanders as a token of respect, recognised as a token of honour among soldiers, and it earned my soldiers a lot of free drinks on a lot of ships and planets. Not a bad 22nd year gift either. The neophyte was there too, smiling as we were all given our medals. I'm glad I saw him again. Praxis was a great Astartes, and a better man. I remember the Salamanders. God Emperor knows they saved me enough times. Dragging my sorry backside out of the fighter, calming me down when I was about to break from stress. Before we parted ways with the Salamanders, I found Lershane with one of their human cohorts, trading stories and notes. That was when I learned he was a writer, and a good enough one to be respected by a Salamander's remembrance or two. The young man, a painter, looked at me and told me in that thick accent, "Keep him close. He has stuff to say. Good stuff too." I've had less awkward encounters with Black Legion Marines than I did with Lershane after that. I didn't tell anyone. They wouldn't really understand. It was something outside of standard guard behaviour. I love my fellow Cadians, but they aren't ones for words or art. They'll understand that I'm telling the truth when they hear this. Lershane had scribbled reams in a footlocker's worth of notebooks. Sketches, random words, poems, stories, anything and everything. So I kept him close. I told Gores that he had a keen eye for morale, which wasn't entirely untrue. I know why I kept him close. Or I don't remember the faces he did. And I suppose a part of me thinks that he was more human than I ever could be again. 2 more years round the sector for us. A minor engagement here, a training meet-up there. Then we were sent home for a brief stop. I went back home, saw my family, and I went to that low rise with its ancient, gnarled tree. I was a day from graduating the Scholam Officium. I was about to get my stripes and bars, but it felt so distant. Then I saw a lanky, bespectacled face staring at me, and I recognised Leok, the boy from my Scholam who used to stare at me and turn away, red-faced, when I caught him looking. My unit stayed at home for 3 months while Gors did all of that tedious handshaking and awful paperwork. I didn't expect to go home again, and I didn't expect Leok. I didn't expect to spend time with him. He had been taken from the Scholam due to a demonstrated aptitude in mathematics. He had just been made a secondary junior production overseer. I was surprised to say the least, and impressed. He had been through training, as we all go through it, and had been redirected into production. They were warm days, better days than I deserved, and I told him about the farmers and the salamanders, and he stroked the scar beneath my eye, the scar left by that rock on Vectus, and then he asked me to marry him, and I said yes. Cadians aren't ones for ideas of love or romance, so we kept things small and quiet. Gors was there, in the back of the chapel. I had to tell my brother 4 times that he wasn't there to do anything but watch. And Gors pressed the medal into my hand and kissed my cheek. And it was his Star of Cadia. He had earned it young, fighting against the Tyranids. I gave it to Leok. He had arranged the whole thing anyway. Lurshane gave my father a piece of paper, a poem. Something he had written during his time at home. The poem was called Fair Tides. I was, of course, pregnant. And of course, Gors lied for me to the Ministorum for a few weeks. I was worried that being pregnant would stop my life. What a terrible thing to think. Unforgivable. I was selected for further command echelon training, and I was kept on Cadia. I was with Leok, and I was 24 and pregnant. Thankfully, I was an officer, so I had access to real Medicaid supplies and surgeons. 15 hours of labour is what it totalled up to. 15 hours of me screaming and crying, and Leok holding my head in his arm and talking to me. And I couldn't do anything but remember the farmers and think that their mothers had been through this too. And then she was there, Tessa, my own tiny Star of Cadia, in all her wailing, purple-eyed, tiny fury. And I saw she had my fire in her eyes, and she had her father's foppish hair. Studying and training kept me on world until she was a year old, and then I was attached again to Gors' battalion and had to say goodbye. I had held the hands of my fellow soldiers as they died in trenches, but saying goodbye to her and Leok nearly killed me. Truly, nearly killed me. I was last on board the lift shuttle, and she was in his arms, her blonde hair flapping in the downdraft as she waved to me. And I couldn't move as the loading ramp shut. I couldn't move a muscle because I was dead inside. And then Lurshane put a hand on my shoulder and pressed a piece of card into my hand. No larger than a smoke tin. And it was a picture of her and Leok that he had drawn. You won't forget them, ma'am. Bastard. Broke my heart all over again. But he knew what he was doing. He knew me by then. Things get dark here, because the unit was involved in a turquoise war that happened on Yunel. We met with a detachment of the Adeptus Auroritas who had requested additional soldiers for training exercises on our world, Yunel. Fanatically devoted to the nth degree and driven inexorably by faith. I have never been told that I shouldn't just be a bloody member of the Guard so much in my life. Lurshane would laugh from under his brow when some canoness or another would tell me that. They would grab my face, turn my head this way and that, like I'm some prize feline being inspected.
Drop the lasgun, child. Drop it, and join us already.
Of course, they didn't mean become a deserter. They just always needed more warm bodies for the ranks, just like the guard does. I politely declined each time, and then very quickly found myself in a true war. The guard and the sisters on one side, and the force of the warp on the other. It figures that my second encounter with the Astartes would be less than ideal. Those training exercises transformed overnight into anti-demon engagements on a world a bit too close to the eye. And it was while fighting said demons that I and the other Cadians encountered a single member of the 1,000 Sons. We were clearing a hab block that was too close to a street that was the scene of a demonic incursion. Tough fighting that. Close quarters. Even tougher when you're looking for humans who need help. That's the true power of the demons. They can hide so very well. I thought I knew fear. But after pulling a family out of a barricaded hab unit, running them to safety and then returning to their block only to hear the screams, the family had merged together and were savaging the rear guard. We had gotten to the block too late and walked into a trap. 30 of the men under Gorza's watch were eaten by the block and its changed inhabitants. And the Canoness, Rose, roared at us to retreat. Hard fighting. Stabbing and shooting down alleyways as the skies wept blood and blue ichor. Then that first hab block collapsed inwards, and the sisters began to chant. The block raised from the street and was consumed entirely. Where it had been now floated a single vast figure. Its headpiece was proud and high, shining gold and blue in the backwash light of the fires in the streets. I pulled at Shane, screaming at him to move, but he couldn't. He was staring at the eye lenses, and I don't know what he saw or heard, and I don't really want to know. The sisters stayed there. As I turned a corner, I looked back and saw them emptying their bolters into the figure. The rounds detonating before even hitting it. We were stuck on that world for 3 weeks while we waited for emergency assistance. Not many of us survived. Sneaking from building to building, scavenging food and water, testing it for corruption. Bloody good job, we're Cadians. Phase 1. Stage 2, basic infantry training on Cadia covers urban guerrilla warfare. We weren't broken by having to fight outnumbered and on the run. We made ourselves known. You can be a demon. You can have rampaged through the warp and butchered your vile kin. But if you don't spot a tripwire, you won't survive a blast from a debt pack that's been blessed by a sister of the Argent Shroud. You learn a lot about yourself when you think you're going to die at any possible second. You remember your daughter and husband, washed in a downdraft of liftcraft. The picture kept me stable in the end. And Lurshane kept the dozen men with me stable too. It was while we were scrabbling through ruined buildings that I heard something like a child weeping. That was not pleasant. I figured I was tainted, that I was hallucinating, until the other soldiers said they heard it too. I peered out from a blasted chapel's stained glass window, and I saw a huge, hunched figure dragging something down the street. I raised the lasgun I had taken from Shane and drew a bead on the figure. Just another demon dragging a human to a horrific fate. Not on my watch. Wait, Sharon said. He was looking for his magnocular. Abhuman. Cadian flag. Injured. Hold. I was breathing hard, unsure of what to do. Then the figure turned its head and looked up at the chapel we were in. It murmured something I couldn't hear and headed our way. I clicked 5 times through the functionally useless Vox link, telling the squad to ready weapons. We watched as this huge abhuman picked up the body that he was dragging and carried it in his giant muscled arms. 13 of us stayed low in the shadows as the abhuman entered the chapel. It was still talking to itself. I couldn't hear it. It walked down the aisle. It hadn't even seen us. Or it didn't care that we were there. And it reached the cracked altar and roared in a voice that was sown with pain and loss.
I brought 'em to you, Emperor. Take 'em home. You promised.
Tess's face will be with me forever. The farmers will be with me forever. And so will that innocent, giant child's voice. The pain and regret and loss in those words shook me to my very marrow, and they ring out in my dreams still. We walked up to the huge, sobbing Ogryn. He was stroking the body's hair and crying sheets of tears, his body racked with his sobs. I placed my hand on his face. He still hadn't registered as being there. And I turned his face to mine, and I saw his eyes, alight with pain and a desperate need for revenge. I'm Officer Brack. Who are you? He just stared at me. He had used all of his words, and I was convinced he would never speak again. But I was willing to be his voice, though. And the body he was dragging? That was his handler and best friend from Cadia, Sergeant Frail von Cazadon. I never knew him, but I've seen his record since. The Ogryn couldn't speak. We fed him, dressed his wounds, and let him sleep next to the altar, curled up at its base. My soldiers were stunned. They didn't know what to say or do. So we stayed in a chapel, and then, when the Ogryn woke, we left. He said goodbye to his friend, and I cried every tear that I had into the singed carpet of the chapel. We had to drag him away in the end. He roared and flailed and begged. He couldn't leave him alone.
What if the bad ones take 'em?
He looked me in my eyes and asked me that. And what could I possibly say? They won't. Because he isn't theirs to take. He's your friend, and he always will be. We carry our friends with us. Forever. And I placed my hand on my chest, where my heart is, and something flashed in his eyes, and he realised, a part of him realised, that I was, in some way, correct. He didn't speak after that. I showed him the picture of Tess and Leok, and he knew that I was doing what I had told him what he should do. The skies on Yunel burned and broiled, and I prayed I would live to see home again. I prayed for the same for the soldiers who were now under my command. And one night, the sky was rent by falling silver stars, and we were found by a legion of sisters. I can't imagine what they thought, seeing us huddled, starved and ragged wretches, covered in bandages and wielding firearms as clubs. Hilarious to imagine that. You spend 6 months in quarantine if you've been exposed to demonic presences. You get scrubbed clean daily. Inspected in minute detail. You're blessed and bathed 5 times a day. It's boring and exhausting and miserable, being so exposed and studied. But I also understand. One well-hidden demonic taint could kill a world. You can never be too safe. Safety doesn't stop the humiliation of it all, though. I spent 6 months in rags aboard Fair Sister, an Adeptus Sororitas ship. During those 6 months, I spent many, many days talking with other soldiers, sisters, and the various people who were in the cells near mine. Canoness Amelya was the one who convinced me in the end.
Listen, dear. Your men. They love you. They always talk about you, ask about you, and demand to see you. And the big one, the Ogryn, he will only speak when we say that you have asked him to talk. You shouldn't join us. You're far too wild. You should be a commissar, my dear. Far too much fire. Just like me. Face the trials, answer the questions, and become the best version of yourself. It's time, Elise. Time for you to answer the call to which you were born. For the Emperor makes no mistakes, and he believes in you.
Powerful, humbling honesty coming from such an important being. She was still terrifying to see. Nothing makes me shudder like a full set of black iron teeth, just like hers. During those months, I had tried to contact Leok and Tess. I had been allowed to send messages, but not receive them, in case it was a ruse by the dark powers. I'd rather crawl through rubble than suffer that. Have you ever broken a rib? When we were released from isolation and allowed to see each other, the Ogryn picked myself and Shane up and hugged us hard enough to pop 2 of my ribs. That was a surprise. Oh, and he also changed Shane's life. You see, he hadn't really been able to comprehend anything that happened on Yunel. And when he asked what Shane's name was, he tried in earnest to say it correctly. He got annoyed and simply said,
Forget that. I'm gonna call you Lurch.
Lurch the poet was born from the isolation cells aboard Fair Sister, and almost every Cadian knows his name. Well, they know Lurch, not Lurshane. Hilarious. I don't know that the Ogryn really understands what happened to him, or to his battalion. I do not think he truly remembers the horror, and I won't speak of it too much. I don't think he remembers moving automotives by hand to clear the way for us. I don't think he can truly comprehend that he saved 11 of us. I'm glad. I don't want him to remember the blood, or the pain, and the losses. Don't carry them with you. I'll admit that I don't know what happened to Gors. We were separated and I lost contact with him. The Vox was useless. Too much interference, so I couldn't heal him. Shortly after that building collapsed, he vanished. I don't know where to or why. Maybe it was him that killed the Thousand Sun, fighting a week-long campaign against the abomination. Or maybe not. No one knows. He was a Cadian and an officer. I will not mourn his loss. He died as he wished to die, fighting the enemies of his home. Good for him, the purple-eyed son of a Crocs. He taught me almost everything I know. And when I applied to the commissariat, I found a recommendation letter and a note of mark waiting for me, from the desk of Hezekiel Prain von Gors. We went home again. Well, we were flown home by the Fair Sister. Blessed and trained and lectured to by the sisters, we returned to Cadian soil again. More medals, more drinks and stories for the men. But I got to see Tess again. Oh, she was tall for such a youngster. Leok had a dramatic lashing of white in his hair from a rogue pigment spill. Her hair was braided close to the scalp in the Cadian twist, and she roared as she flew at me. She demanded I tell her everything and show her more, and I did. And it seems so long ago now. Yet it feels so close too. It feels as if I can turn around and see them there, smiling at me. But it seems to take a millennia for me to turn. All of the children in her class knew my name, the Brack Barbarian. Lurch had drawn a picture of me on Yunel. I was stood atop a pile of rubble, firing a wire stock autogun into a wave of pink horrors. I had no idea until Leok showed me the original in a frame in our home. I know Leok wanted me to stay. I know that. He wouldn't ask me. He wouldn't put that weight on my shoulders. But he knew that one day I would realise I had had enough. And I would just appear and stay there for good. And I should have. I should have stayed there. And I shouldn't have been the Brack Barbarian. I should have been Tess's mother. And I shouldn't have asked Leok to work 12-hour shifts and then spend 4 hours helping Tess. I knew all these things. But I also know that I had to serve. I couldn't leave Lurch, or the Nine, or the Ogryn. So one morning I told Leok I had to leave, and he understood, as well as he could. Tess told me she understood. Tess pressed a small box into my hand as he kissed my cheek and hugged me. Give it to the big man from the picture. She meant the Ogryn, of course. More liftcraft. We were inserted into the 10th Battalion of the 67-62s. And I gave the Ogryn the box, not knowing what was in there, but it couldn't be anything other than what it was. Gorza's Star of Cadia.
Bloody hell!
The Ogryn said, staring at the small silver star.
What's this for?
Saving my life, I told him, my hand on his scarred cheek. Don't you dare bloody hug her. Her ribs have only just fixed. Lurch shouted to the Ogryn. He didn't hug me. I actually wish he had. He got confused and sort of patted me on the head. I don't think of myself as unique, but I'm not sure if anyone else has ever been patted on the head by an Ogryn. Lurch laughed himself hoarse until the Ogryn jabbed him in the gut. That shut him up. We departed for the Cadian Gate. By this point, I was 9 months into Commissar Training and Regulation Programme 3.153. 4 months into the warp were spent reading, watching and training alongside the 10th Battalion. Right. Creig. Where do I begin? I pride myself on my service. I think there is honour in service. I do not think there is honour on Creig. I do not think the possibility for honour is there anymore. I was sent along with a few other officers to meet a Creig Support General. General 3:4. No names, of course. Wouldn't want your soldiers to think they're human. We met him in a void-shielded, multi-storey manor that was located above ground on Creig. Do you have any idea how many resources are wasted just to keep that ridiculous palace operating? There are tended gardens, fresh water for the plants, imported food from off-world. Disgusting. Billions live beneath the ravaged surface of Creig, starving to death in the dark and the cold of a world controlled by those who insist the innocent are guilty. Myself, Lurch, General von Vang, and a small number of others met 3:4 in an outrageously gaudy stateroom on the 4th floor of the mansion. I hid my disgust. Lurch could not. The meeting went well. By that I mean 3:4 didn't try to shoot us. Lurch didn't say anything, and the rest of us kept strictly to business. So after the meeting, when we all went to receive refreshments in a dining room adorned with painting, Lurch had to ask, "Why is this building kept so tidy at such expense?" We didn't get an answer. Instead, those brainwashed teenagers bristled and took offence. Lurch had insinuated that the Lords of Creig were wasting resources. Of course, he hadn't actually done so. They're just brainwashed. Lurch apologised and affected an air of apologetic reverence and asked for a tour of the room. attempting to disarm the situation. It worked. There were 7 of us Cadians and 10 Kriegers. We were drinking. By we, I mean us Cadians. We were drinking and discussing battles, tactics, and theories. I explained how we had survived on Yanel. One of the Creig officers stood up suddenly from the table. "You're telling me that you abandoned all righteous patterns of war and acted like some rogue animals in the face of horror?" He actually shouted that at us. I stood up, my hands raised to calm things down. "No, of course not. We adapted to the shifting nature of the fight and did as much damage as we possibly could. That's the nature of war." His masked face tilted. I imagined him sneering beneath that mask. What would you, a Cadian, know of the true nature of war? The audacity of the prick. "We know more than enough about war, officer. We've been fighting for thousands of years. Our history spans back into the dark, a dark we continue to fight." Then he did it, of course. Earlier I mentioned that the officer Cadet Gallan seeks to take the fire in people like me and temper it. Oh, it does. But it also keeps the fire alive. What would a woman know about the history of war? What would you know of the pain of hate and the glory of combat? I lowered my hands and felt that old fire broiling inside me. I know that I don't shoot my own men. I seek to help them. Do not question my knowledge, sir. I am not an officer by mistake, and I will not be insulted. The room was truly silent. Then, in the silence, Lurch said, out loud, "Ha! Look at that. The painter got the colour palette wrong on this general's mask." The soldier next to him slapped him, and it all went to shit very quickly. The officer pulled a las pistol to shoot Lurch. I grabbed his wrist, slammed my forehead into his mask, threw the pistol through the large, hand-blown stained glass window. Whoops! Thankfully, no one else pulled a gun until the Ogryn smashed through the roof in a drop pod. Because of course he did. The roof caved in entirely. The pod collapsed almost half the mansion, and the Ogryn roared into my peripheral vision. I was down at that point, being kicked to mulch by 3 Kriegers. Thankfully, the captain of our ship had sent out a Thunderhawk to fetch us. The Ogryn smashed the Kriegers to pieces with his bare hands. He hit that officer with one of his own soldiers. He used a man like a club, and then caved in the face of another officer. Don't mess with the people that an Ogryn loves. I passed out. It had been a tough fight. Cut me some slack. I have no idea how the Ogryn possibly walked across the scouring, hateful surface of Creig, but he did, with me on one shoulder and Lurch on the other. He put us on the Thunderhawk, and the captain opened immediate comms with the leadership of Creig to defuse the situation. It's here that the version of me that is most well known is born. I thanked the Ogryn. I have no doubt that he saved my life, and I owed him. And I could not look at him and have him call me ma'am or officer. So I told him to call me Miss Elise. I was in the Medicae for 3 weeks. Nearly lost my left eye. My nose and cheekbones were broken. A broken leg. Don't worry, I did much worse to them. I do not know how the captain managed to secure the return of the other Cadians from Creig, but he did. It took 6 months, but he did it. The Ogryn will be arrested and face trial aboard your ship. We will send evidence of his staggering crimes, and you will hold him responsible for his pathetic little rebellion. That's what I was told by 3:4. I agreed, knowing I would do no such thing. General Vor then received an emergency call from a world near Vostroya that needed immediate assistance. Our duty to the Emperor is more important than some damaged palace, General. A genius move. The Kriegers had to let us go or demand we don't fight so that we may instead flagellate ourselves over a partially collapsed building. Play them at their own game. I can't argue with the results the Death Corps manages, but I can and will bristle in the face of their attitudes. None of the things I learned applied to them. They did not care for bullets or boots and only wanted to win or die. I can't imagine it, having your sense of self so utterly desolated. I faced the toughest tests of my whole life as we left Creig. The Officio Commissariat Fledgling Competency Test Schedule. 4 weeks of daily interviews, written treaties, presentations and discussions of famous battles. And just like that, I was stood in full parade dress, listening to a 260-year-old man tell me, "Congratulations, Officer von Casabrack. Henceforth you will be known as Commissar von Casabrack." Lurch, the Ogryn, and a few others were stood in full parade dress waiting for me. No one really knew what to say. I'm a commissar now, I guess. That's all I could manage. They went wild, hugging me and cheering and singing. They got me blackout drunk, and the Ogryn carried me to bed. It's not all that different, going from officer to commissar. More of a political thing, really. You're trusted to represent not only your world, but the wider realm of mankind. I got a new cap and a hat, which were both too hot in warmer climes and too cold in colder ones. Fine by me. It reminded me of my role. People do look at you differently. That's a certainty. And those around you change too. Lurch became untouchable, and the Ogryn took on the air of a dread enforcer. Loyal and devoted. He was only as devoted to us as we were to him. I had planned to take us back to Cadia. 2 more years of service, then I would request a break. I had been a commissar for 3 months when Abaddon the Despoiler crashed a ship into my home and destroyed it. And my bars and medals, the stories and myths of the Ogryn and I, meant nothing. Nothing. Because every single thing I had been training to save had been taken from me. Lurch pulled me from an airlock 3 times, and the whole time, the Ogryn didn't understand. At least I hope he doesn't understand. It took me 3 weeks to come back to myself. The Ogryn and Lurch stopped me from commandeering the ship we were on at gunpoint. They confined me to a private room and stood outside, waiting for my personal storm of grief to settle. Just a little. They did that for 3 days, bringing me food and water. I remember leaving that room. I had ripped everything apart. The floor was awash with shredded books and papers. I had ripped the furniture apart and smashed the lumen strips. The wiry, weedy teenage girl I had been. The young cadet. The cadet who was hit in the eye with a rock. The soldier I had been on Yunel. Leoc's wife. Acadian. Tess's mother. They're still in that room to this day. And I am not capable of going in there. Because I know I will never, ever want to leave if I go back in. I had hoped to retire and train other soldiers. And live with my family. With Leoc's family. And by the Emperor, I had hoped that the Ogryn would get to meet Tess. I envy him. He thinks he can see his mama again. I wish I had met her. I wonder what she would have said to me. What wisdom she would have passed on to me. Wisdom gained through a lifetime of misunderstood existence. But I won't know. And I won't go back. I have greater things to do. For revenge is a waltz that requires an orchestra of well-trained soldiers to play. And I have plenty of them. I lost many to pain. Pain, grief, drink, and violence. More than once, I stopped pit fights that were to the death, so that a soldier didn't shame his home by taking his own life. And they saw it in me. The fire. And without meaning to, I spread it, and the 10th Battalion was set ablaze by the fires of my bottomless hatred. I am far, far beyond anger now. I've interred enough Cadians on board this ship, and I'm fed information by Black Code sources, and I hunt the Black Legion. We fought them once, not far from the Eye of Terror. We encountered the Salamanders. Praxis was of course a sergeant by now, fully augmented and huge in his armour. He knew not to say he was sorry for my loss. He tapped his chestplate. Vulcan lives, Elise. Cadia stands. He nodded once to me and knew that I understood. I understand that he is not made less by the loss of his father. Nor is he defined by Vulcan's death. I was made more by my hate. And I remember Cadia. Just as Praxis hopes to one day remember Vulcan. He took my hand and whispered things to me that I will not soon forget. Then the 10th Battalion and the Salamanders were engaged by a Black Legion fleet that was leaving the Cadian sector. The Ogryn did indeed beat a member of the Black Legion to death with his own helmet. If you insist on having curved serrated horns on your helmet, I would advise that you never let anyone rip it off your head, because they will use those horns as a weapon against you, and you'll deserve it. But of course, fate wasn't done taking. Not yet. 5,000 of us Cadians engaged the Black Legion. Many were killed. One of those killed Cadians was my friend. My old friend, my dear blood brother, Lurshane. The Ogryn refused to accept it. I know he resented me saying that Lurch died a hero, but he did. In the sense that he faced off against insurmountable odds. He was, and is, a hero because his love for his people, for his fellow man, lives on after his death. Aboard the Salamander ship, the Forge's Wrath, there is a picture that he drew in charcoal. A picture of a scout marine stood proud atop a bridge, staring into the valley below. He is a hero because the love that he poured into his work defined first his life and then his death. The Ogryn couldn't come to the tombs aboard our ship. I understand why. I understand that he couldn't say goodbye to another friend, as he had when we first met. When I married Leot in that small chapel dedicated to the saints of Cadia, Lurch gave my father the only copy of the Tree of Cadia. He had written it on a piece of Ministorum Vellum. I only read it once, but I remembered it. And now it's known by every member of the 10th Battalion. I read it once, and said it aloud once, at his interment aboard our ship. 4,500 Cadians in full parade dress laid my friend to rest. As he died in my arms, he pressed one last notebook into my blood-slicked hand, and it was blank, save for one page that contained the now only living copy of the last Tree of Cadia. I had to stand and not scream or cry as I recited it from memory. If I should die, think only this of me.
I am free.
There will be some corner of the galaxy that is
Forever me.
And remember now.
That I am free.
And think of my life and my love with all pain shed away. Remember the screams and cries of better days. Days spent in love and colour beneath that
Tree.
But remember now that I am free. And fear not the fire, the cold, or hate. Remember only the hope we could see.
For Cadia stands.
For Cadia stands, and all was well.
And remember now.
And remember now that I am free. We shield from the rain and blood beneath her boughs.
And she will be with me always.
And she will be with me always. And remember the tree. For Cadia stands.
For Cadia stands.
Just as I am free. I am Elise von Caza-Brack, Commissar of the Amalgamated Combined Arms of the 1st Legion Hunter Battalion. Oh, and the Ogryn. For those of you who wish to know, his name is